Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, Samsung's new flash file system, WoW's exploits, and Microsoft's DMCA takedown. Plus, some hardcore data center tech, and a big batch of your questions and our answers. All that and a heck of a lot more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 80 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. This episode was live on October 11th for release on October 18th, 2012. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by ScaleEngine.com, and I think you might hear more about them as well. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the professor, and the tech, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hey, Matt, welcome to episode 80, which technically
which
we
I'm
aren't
not
really
actually here for.
Yeah, no, this is we're in the future right now, and hopefully you're having a good time at your OBSDCon, and I'm sure we'll hear all about it.
I will be, it'll be my first whole day in Poland, and I will be mostly
jet-lagged
to hell.
Yeah, but I'm sure we'll get to hear all the goodies in episode 81, or at least some tidbits, right?
Yep.
At least a few tidbits. All right, then. Well, why don't we get right into our first story this week, because we managed to get a great batch of stories, and we got a ton of emails and feedback we're going to get to. We've been planning for this episode for a long time, so I'm really looking forward to it. Should we jump off with our first story, the Samsung story? All right, sir. Lay it on me.
So Samsung has contributed a new file system to the Linux kernel, F2FS, which is the flash-friendly file system. It's a log-structured file system designed to take advantage of some of the features and side effects of SSDs and avoid some of the drawbacks. So it's based on the concept of a log-structured file system, but with some design, because the original log-structured file system was designed in like 1988, and so it's based on a couple of assumptions that turned out to not be true.
Yeah.
So first question is, what is a log-structured file system? So like I said, it was originally proposed in 1988, and the idea was that instead of storing data how we normally do in a file system where we keep track of where we wrote each block and so on, it does a circular log. So it's kind of like the idea you have with journaling, but for the entire file system. So basically, as you write, you constantly write to the head of the log, and you just keep adding to it. And so when you change a file, it's basically the idea of kind of like copy on write, where you're just writing the new changes out to a different place. Mm-hmm. Although, depending on the type of log structure file systems, it may only write the blocks that are new, or may rewrite the whole file. Because eventually you're going to have to rewrite the whole file anyway, so it's a trade-off of whether you want to do that now or in the background. So basically, it just keeps writing through the hard drive until it gets to the end, and then it circles back to the front, right? And it's based on the assumption that writes need to be faster, and that reads will be almost free because of caching, right? Machines are going to have so much memory that they're not going to need to read from the disk very often.
Really?
Which at some point they thought that was going to come true, but then our need for storage got bigger, right?
Well, and with mobile devices, because you got to figure with Samsung, they're targeting this for Android.
Yes, this is specifically for Android, although it's useful for other things as well.
Yeah.
But when it was designed in the 80s, like I'm talking about the original idea of the log structured file system, not Samsung's. Samsung had to make some changes because these assumptions turned out to be untrue.
Gotcha.
But in the late 80s, it looked like systems were going to have a lot of memory, and that they were going to not and they didn't envision that we're going to need gigabytes and terabytes of storage.
Right. I mean, who would need that much storage? That'd be ridiculous.
You'd have lots of RAM and cache, and you wouldn't have to worry about reading off the disk very much, but you need the persistent storage for writing, right? So the idea with the log structured file system is to do big contiguous writes all the time and not have to worry about it.
Yeah. That's
and so you would gain write speed, although it would cost you read speed, because your writes would be, if you had to read a file, it would be fragmented all over the place based on when it was changed and so on. But with the if you're going to have all this cache, you wouldn't have the problem of the reads being slow because of the seek time. As a side effect, with SSDs, you don't actually have that same seek time, right? The seek time is so small, it almost doesn't matter. So it's almost like the whole drive is a cache when it's an SSD. Right? So SSDs, a log structure file system is advantageous on an SSD because seeking around to find the spot where the blocks of the file are, it doesn't slow down like it does on a spinning drive, right?
Okay.
So that makes the discontiguous writes aren't a performance detriment anymore. But one of the downsides of a log structure file system is that it requires a garbage collection process. Basically, because you're writing through to the end of the device and then starting back at the beginning, you have to basically, as you're writing at the beginning, you have to have a garbage collector going ahead of the log and finding any blocks that are still used, right? Because most of the blocks have been replaced with newer blocks, but some files don't change, and so they'll still be there. And so those files need to be rewritten to the head of the log. Although, there's a problem with that where you end up, wearing out the drive by rewriting blocks that never change a whole bunch of times. Wasn't an issue with spinning drives.
Right, exactly.
Because they don't have that problem, but for Flash it is.
Right.
But most newer implementations of the log structure file system are in fact not circular. What they do is they break the disk up into a bunch of segments, sometimes only like 1 megabyte or even smaller. And then what they do is the garbage collector goes and finds the segment that has the least amount of its space used up. So right, if the segment contains only one file or one block, we'll move that one block to a new block and then recycle that old block or old section.
Okay, clever.
This way, eventually all the files that don't change very often will probably be grouped up in a chunk that never changes, and then the log can rotate through all the other ones. So this would allow the file system to kind of better fit with the drive's wear leveling as well. So with some work here, this would allow better use of the SSDs and speed up Android devices. So that's why Samsung made it.
Now, did you catch which license they've released it under?
Well, it's part of the Linux kernel, so it would have to be the same license as the kernel.
So they're going awesome. So they're going directly at the kernel level. So that's
yes. Well, because file system has to be almost right.
So then we will likely see this used outside of just Android devices and things
like that.
Well,
there are already some log structured file systems for Linux, but Samsung's kind of focusing this one on SSDs and eMMCs and flash cards and so on, where most other log structured file systems were still based on using regular hard drives, not even SSDs. So this one, instead of being a log structured file system, this is one that's flash friendly, right? It's designed to be used for flash.
That's awesome. Makes sense.
Yep. So like I said, there are some other log structured file systems, like NIL-FS or New Implementation Log File System. And also there's the original one is under a BSD license, and it had kind of fallen into disrepair after years of not being used, but it's being updated again by NetBSD. And so there's still a BSD licensed log structured file system as well.
That's great. That's awesome.
The F2FS is still focused on using SSDs.
Okay.
So it's still flash devices that have a controller chip and present themselves as block devices, not just the raw NAND flash. But there is a FreeBSD project to make NAND-FS, which is a log structured file system designed to work with raw NAND flash devices. So it would basically be like an SSD, but without the controller. It's just a bunch of flash chips. And the file system deals directly with the flash chips.
That's amazing.
So then, if there's a problem with the logic in the controller, like there have been in a couple of like the SandForce ones we've talked about before, with certain SSDs having performance problems, well, if it's part of the file system, then you can patch that. But also it means that you can have different performance tuning and stuff, because basically you let the file system handle it all.
Well, and then it means the operating system is aware at a lot lower level of what's going on with the storage.
And, if the file system knows what's happening with different files, it can probably do a much better version of wear leveling, right? Where normally the SSD moves certain block locations around on the device to try to wear all the flash chips evenly so that one of them doesn't wear out a lot more than, faster than the rest. But sometimes it doesn't actually know what's happening because it doesn't understand the file system. It only knows what it's, pretending to be a regular hard drive with sectors. It
doesn't know what the workload is or the potential future workload where the operating system could even do some intelligent, pre-thinking of what might need to happen.
It kind of brings together this kind of the same idea you get with ZFS, where you're bringing the volume management and the file system together.
Right.
Right. So in this case, it's the file system talking to the raw flash devices rather than going through a translation to block device, which then gets translated to the NAND flash by the controller on the drive.
And like the chat room points out, is the other advantage is it does technically lower the cost of that storage because maybe not not
those
directly.
Controller chips are really the expensive part.
Yeah, I mean it's not going to probably make a huge difference for flash storage, but it's got to help, I would think. So that's a great point too.
Actually, the main implementation of the NAND FS for FreeBSD uses the Marvel plug computer. It's a tiny little computer that's like the size of like a wall adapter for most, like your router or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's a whole computer in there, an ARM chip, and a bunch of flash memory and so on. And so that's the device they've been testing this with because it's really small and really cheap and can run FreeBSD. Although it's comes stock with Ubuntu, so maybe it's interesting for people anyway.
Yeah.
So people may be interested in it anyway. But
all right, sir. Well, should we move on to this next story?
Sure.
All right. Well, World of Warcraft players, you better brace yourselves because there's a new exploit that is infecting entire realms. Or maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration. Is it, Alan?
Well, the problem's fixed now, but anyway.
Oh, okay.
So on October 7th, all the players and even NPC characters in a number of cities on various servers in the MMO World of Warcraft started dying mysteriously. There's some videos out there of, they're just people walking around and just watching as this wave of people just starts falling over in front of them. And eventually even the person in the video dies. And it was even killing the NPCs. And there's some screenshots of just like piles of skeletons from where all these people in the big towns in the game.
Yeah.
So there's a forum thread I linked here that talks about the issue and different people's experiences and so on. Then Blizzard applied a hotfix to resolve the issue, and apparently they banned a bunch of accounts that were involved in it and so on. Although obviously, if you're going to run an exploit or something, you're probably not using your regular everyday WoW account.
Yeah.
But yes, there's an official response from Blizzard I have linked here as well. But
it's funny to watch this stuff. It's funny to think of this, but I guess there is motivation to exploit these virtual worlds, the virtual currencies, or just the accounts are worth money, or just even just to be a troll, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
I think this one was just trolling. I don't know that anybody was walking around like looting all the corpses or anything.
Sometimes you almost think maybe these guys do it just for the pleasure of getting a little poke at Blizzard, maybe.
Yeah, or getting on the news.
That too, right? Getting people like us to talk about it. Oh, good point. Good point. All right, should we go over to Mozilla's security blog this week? Kind of a surprise announcement this morning, wasn't there?
Kind of. So yesterday they released Firefox 16, and then a couple hours later they removed Firefox 16 from their download website and reverted to offering 15.0.1.
Wow.
A vulnerability was found in Firefox 16 that could allow a malicious website to determine what URLs you had visited and maybe actually get the URL. So not just tell whether you've been to a site or not, but the actual full URL of the page. And possibly even the URL parameters on the page, which could include sensitive information or even authentication tokens. So, that could allow someone to hijack your session or something.
Yeah, that's pretty significant.
Yes. So the vulnerable version was pulled from the download page less than a day after it was posted. No users were automatically updated to Firefox 16. They hadn't thrown that switch yet, so only people who manually downloaded 16 will have it. Everybody else would still have 15. All users of Firefox 16 are encouraged to downgrade to 15.0.1. And then anyone that's still using 16, as soon as 16.0.1 comes out, will be forced to upgrade.
So if you were hot to trot on the new update, which I know some of you out there are, maybe go check, see if you have that 16.
They hope to have 16.0.1 out sometime today, but it's pretty late and it didn't look like it was out yet, so maybe it won't be till tomorrow.
Do you think they're just iterating too fast? I mean, 16 came out, what, 3 weeks after 15, which then,
right. Very likely this should have been called 15.0.2, right? But it did, the reason they were releasing 16, it was to fix 24 known vulnerabilities, 21 of which were labeled as critical.
Oh, okay.
So this fix was actually fixing 21 known security flaws. So it makes sense that they brought it out.
So the version numbers are almost pointless, because that really does sound like just a...
like there were no new features as far as I can tell.
Oh, actually...
sorry, I think there were some new features, but...
There was a lot of improvements with HTML5 and a new debugging console that's built in that looks pretty sweet.
Yes, but apparently it breaks some plugins.
Yeah.
Which I think is one of the reasons why they hadn't pushed the update like they normally would.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to see Firefox is trying to kick some butt, but they got to be careful about this kind of stuff because they don't want to get a bad rep.
Yep. Well, in this case, they found it before they pushed the auto update, so
and they responded really. Oh, that's good, and they responded really quick, and that shows that having that staggered auto release plan is just good practice because they're able to catch it before that kicked in. So there you go.
Although it doesn't. Why didn't they catch this during testing before they cut the release?
That's kind of what I meant by it's like they're maybe moving too fast, but yeah. Yep. Now, hopefully, they'll be more careful in the future.
But I have a BBC link here that covers the issues pretty well.
Speaking of the BBC, they were one of the people that were impacted by a Microsoft DMCA takedown, weren't they?
Yes. So, as we've seen, lots of companies are stepping up their automated DMCA requests.
Gosh, seriously.
Or rather, most of them technically aren't a DMCA request because those require that you, sign off with under penalty of perjury that this is accurate and so on. A lot of them will send takedown requests.
Yes.
Most providers will treat as if they were a full DMCA request, but they're not.
Right.
And basically, they incorrectly asked Google to remove a bunch of sites from the search results. Although the sites they were asking Google to remove didn't make a lot of sense. Basically, they were claiming they were attempting to prevent unauthorized distribution of Windows 8 beta. And they listed a number of different infringing websites. I think it was about 65 or so. But they included AMC Theaters, the BBC, BuzzFeed, CNN, the Huffington Post, TechCrunch, Real Clear Politics, Rotten Tomatoes, Science Direct, Washington Post, Wikipedia, and a bunch of sites from the U.S. government. They also did some takedown requests against Spotify.
Wow, I was just reading that.
What does that have to do with Windows 8?
And what's so funny is so many of the things they're asking Google, people have done checks on this, so many of the things people are asking, or that Microsoft is asking Google to remove from the search results are in Bing's own search results.
Yes. And actually, I think one time they asked Google to remove a link from their search results that linked to a Bing search result of the term they were looking for. But basically, of the 65 web pages that they asked Google to take down, nearly half of them didn't even mention Windows 8 at all. And a bunch of them were just news stories about Windows 8, nothing about pirating Windows 8.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
It appears that their search string for deciding what to take down may have actually just been the number 45 in the URL.
I hope you're joking.
So we don't know for sure, but it seemed that a lot of the posts had 45 somewhere in the URL, usually like the article number or something.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Alan, Torrent Freak has been hot on these kind of stories. They're making a name for following this kind of stuff. So link to that in the show notes.
And there was a story recently. I think we covered it last week, but maybe not. About YouTube changing the way they do some takedowns. Certain types of videos and certain providers will be exempt from the automatic takedown process. And when a takedown request will actually be reviewed by a person before it gets taken down because of the number of false positives that resulted in NASA's footage getting taken down because some local TV station claimed that they owned the copyright to NASA's video because they aired it as part of their newscast and said that anything that was in their newscast is copyright to them. And a bunch of things like that resulted.
So part of the reason why it works like that is they have a system where you can submit your video to YouTube as a content creator and say, add this to your ID system, and then anything that matches that. So if somebody else plays a clip of their video, so what that local station does is they add it. They say, yeah, add our entire clip, add our entire news broadcast to your ID system, and then it just flags anything that has the NASA clip in it, or it was. It's just out of control.
And it's like, but you don't own that clip. NASA does.
Right. Any other thoughts on that story, sir?
Not really. Just that, we're seeing more and more of this, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah. And it's happening. It happens at Jupiter. But I get takedowns from episodes that have been up for years. And they just all of a sudden get takedown notices from YouTube. It's just ridiculous. All right. Well, we want to say thank you to GoDaddy.com for sponsoring this week's episode of TechSNAP. And, of course, GoDaddy has a really great promo for you, and they expire soon, folks. So I encourage you to act quickly. Now, we're going to do something special. First, let me tell you about the codes before we do something special here. You can use our code 599TECH to get a .com for $5.99. $5.99 for a .com if you use the code 599TECH. Or the one that they brought back just because people have been asking for it is the 20% off your order, which is great for renewals or great for something that didn't include in something we've listed.
Yep, like who is privacy, SSL certificates, whatever.
Yeah, sure. Just use the code GO20 off 5 to get that. But check out this great video that GoDaddy posted online of some of the tech that's in one of their data centers. We'll play a bit of this because it's relevant to our interests.
Today, we'll take a look at our main U.S. data center that is home to 4 state-of-the-art server rooms. This is a typical 8kW design that we have in a lot of our environments. We're at the back of the rack right now. This is very standard design for us. We have our 2-arm power PDU strips, and then we have our cabling done in a fashion that's very neat and workmanlike, orderly. One of the benefits of doing this is trying to repair and service all these IT servers. We can do it in a very rapid fashion. We're not struggling with all the different cables and trying to find out what's going on. By making this neat, it really minimizes risk that we don't impact any other servers while we're working on a particular server. At this facility, we've got rooms that go from 100 watts per square foot all the way to 300 watts per square foot. High-density server rooms generate heat, and the servers themselves need to be kept at a constant inlet temperature. With that in mind, GoDaddy is heavily invested in building data centers with eco-conscious central plants. We're now located in our central plant for the facility. In this plant are several 400-ton chillers. We have a large chill water loop system that sends out 55-degree water to our server rooms. Our craw units then gather the heat from our server rooms and returns back 75-degree water, which completes the heat exchange process. One of our large initiatives is trying to be energy efficient and as green to the environment as possible. For the last 5 years, we've been working on a lot of projects to try to reduce our energy consumption, which is measured through our PUE rating. We're currently at a 1.7, and we've got projects planned out to try to get that well below 1.6. Another example of GoDaddy's eco-friendly building design is the installation of craw AC units with plug fan technology. So in this craw hallway, we are taking all the heat coming out of the server racks, and we are removing the heat by using the 55-degree water supply from the central plant and discharging 72-degree air back to the racks. GoDaddy's main goal to our customers is 24/7, 365 of uptime. To help ensure customers' websites and data are safe and fully powered, we install external power generators at all our data centers. We're now located in one of our generator switchgear rooms. This switchgear is connected to 7 generators sitting out back. Basically, its main purpose is just waiting for utility outage. Once it recognizes utility outage, calls for the generators. Generators close to this bus. This system now exports the power back to the field, back to the UPS systems, and our server environment and our customers don't see anything occurring. In this facility, there are 10 large-scale dedicated battery rooms, each housing 180 550-pound, 20-year DC voltage batteries. The main function of the battery room is just continuous power. So whatever happens on the outside world with the utility and or if we're on generator, all this power comes into the UPS system. We invert it to DC. The batteries are in parallel with that DC power. Any voltage fluctuation, any brownout, batteries make up for time lost, send it out to our servers so our servers don't even know anything. A high-tech facility requires high-tech security. Our server rooms have vascular or iris scanning technology to guarantee only those with high-level authorization are allowed into these sensitive areas.
Vascular.
Each data center is constantly monitored by specially trained security personnel. We design all our data centers with a singular focus to serve the needs of our customers. With GoDaddy, you can feel confident that your data, your websites, your domain names are all protected and available 24/7, 365.
How cool is that? So thank you to GoDaddy for supporting the TechSNAP program. They've been sponsors for forever. I mean, practically. It seems like from almost the near beginning of the show. So use our code 599TECH to get a .com for $5 and 99 cents.
The Velcro zip ties. Very handy.
How awesome is that? Now, folks, you gotta go. If you're an audio listener or something like that, you gotta go check out the show notes because that video is full of some server brawn. There's a lot of good stuff in that. So if you didn't get to see it with your eyeballs, check out the link to that.
It's a bit of a different approach there to use a computer room air handler, basically to suck out the hot air, cool it with chilled water, and then blow it back in. It's a little different than the way it works at the main data center we're at, where they pump the chilled water under the raised floor, and then fans blow the cold air up into the cold aisles and suck it down in the hot aisles, and it all happens under the floor instead of above in the ceiling. But
and it's interesting too because they mentioned in the video a couple of times that they have a couple of different approaches for different data centers, and I wonder if at a certain point if they don't just slowly move everything standardized to one cooling system.
Probably, but you try different things when you build different data centers, and
well, in different climates, different things work better
as well. Yes, for example, we showed a video a couple of months back from OVH. They're building their new data center in Canada. And it's based on sucking in air from outside into a big building, which then has smaller buildings inside of it. And
it was really neat. So cool. All right. Well, with all of that done, then that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. And thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or starting a discussion thread in our subreddit at links.techsnap.tv or using the contact form, which you can find a link for that at the top of jupiterbroadcasting.com. Alan, why don't we start with the thread that we've been waiting to get to for a while, things that I wish the new hires knew, or you could flip that around, things I wish the well-experienced people would tell me. And we have a thread going right now in our subreddit, and I think I'll read one of the first ones I wanted to pick out because it's an interesting angle to think about it from. It comes from Dictator, I think, and he's talking about from the interview perspective. He says, I wish I asked more about tool sets when interviewing. Starting a job, working with people who have worked in the same shop for 10 plus years, who have never been exposed to different ways to do things, are oftentimes inflexible and will not use standard operating system tools like RPM or apt. Noobs ask about tool development for mundane tasks. If people are using 10-plus-year-old in-house tools rather than standard, something might be wrong. And I have personally ran into this several times where if we have a new hire who comes from generally like really big industry, like he's been at Microsoft for a long time or he's been at Boeing for a long time, because those are what is in my backyard here in Washington. Right. They are very what we call vertical in their knowledge set. Like they'll know a certain process and system top to bottom, everything about it. But that was like their role. And I'm not trying to stereotype and generalize. That's not always the case, but I have run into that.
That a lot of times when you're getting someone who had been with a large corporation for a long time, they're very much stuck in that process.
Yeah, they had like a process and a job that they owned in their organization, and they got really good at that thing. So, it is a good question to ask because people often people who work like that don't even realize necessarily that they're missing out on knowledge for some of the other tool sets. So sometimes they're not even aware that they're deficient because they think
and sometimes what you get with new hires is if they're fresh out of school or whatever, oftentimes they don't know about some of the tools, but also they think of a clever little hack that'll work for now and don't realize how big of a problem that's going to end up causing later on. A clever little solution that works now, but how well is that going to work later? And, it's not documented or anything. So a year from now, when you forgot all about it and something changes or breaks, then someone else has to deal with it and it's some kludge or something.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that little hack will solve this one problem, but it doesn't actually solves this one issue, but it doesn't solve the problem.
Right. Anyone in that list you want to pick out?
I don't know if there's anything specific. There's one here about, I wish new hires knew more about version control.
Oh, yeah.
And where to find... I had that problem, especially, I hired a bunch of people to work on a project. Every one of them on their resume said they knew how to use Subversion, SVN.
Yeah.
all of them can manage to check code in and out, but none of them understand what a branch is or how to do a feature branch or how to merge stuff from one branch into another.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really become kind of troublesome.
It's a bottleneck.
And the graphics guy likes to just somehow lose code by when there's a conflict. He's just like, oh, use mine for everything, and like undoes 2 days of work for somebody.
Oh.
And a bunch of stuff. It's just like,
When we asked this question on Coder Radio, that was the number one thing that the senior developers sent in was version control. Why don't people know version control? And I think we take for granted, right? Because until you have to collaborate with people, it's not like mission critical. It's just good practice.
I guess, but like as soon as I started using it one time, you can just to keep track of my own changes, because you go and you delete a block of code and replace it with something new, and then after you're like, I kind of want that back now.
Yeah.
And if you don't have version control, you don't have it.
Yeah.
Well, when I started using Subversion, the first thing I did was go and read the Subversion manual. It's a book, but it's online as an HTML file.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, look, there's this chapter on branching and merging, which is exactly what I want to know how to do, because I want to have a slightly separate, each of my customers is going to have a slightly different version of this app that I've written that's going to have their customizations. But when I update the root app, I want to merge those changes into each customer's app so they all get the upgrade, but it doesn't lose any of their cumizations. And so I read this one chapter. It took me like 40 minutes, and I understand how feature branches work and so on. And I can't seem to convince these people on this other project to just read a couple of pages of documentation and you completely understand it, and it has examples and it talks about it, and it's all
well.
Like, you guys are the programmers. I'm a sysadmin. You're supposed to be better at this than me.
I noticed too that the chat room is mentioning Git is a good solution, and that was something that we talked about on Coder Radio.
Yes,
you can learn any version control system, but you need to, whatever the project you're working with, you got to learn their system.
Yeah, admittedly though, I'm I like SVN, and I'm kind of stuck on it because I don't want to learn something else.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true too. Well, I wanted to point out one that I have struggled with, that Josh Strobel left in here. He said, what I wish would be understood by people claiming to be web developers. Learn web design from W3 schools does not make you a web developer. And what he kind of goes on to struggle with here is when you're doing the hiring practice here, sometimes some of these terms we use are very loose, and there's not clear specifics and qualifications as what it means in order to be able to call yourself something.
Yes, or saying that SVN. It's like I can use Tortoise SVN to check stuff in and out of the repository isn't the same as knowing how to do branching and merging and so on.
So this is an interesting one that I'll read this last one from Dark Pixel, and then I'll leave it for an exercise for the audience to, if they want to join in, they can.
Yep.
When I started, I wish I had been more aware of other people's time. As low man on the totem pole, I started out getting assigned a bunch of small, non-urgent tasks each day. These tasks occasionally needed a decision by my boss. For example, if I noticed one of our servers was trending that it would run out of space in a month, I would need to task my boss if he wanted me to order larger drives, set up a new server, etc., etc. I would run this up to his office and ask questions, not realizing that he was deep in code or in the middle of troubleshooting a complex issue. I still have to remind myself that from time to time, if it's not urgent, just send an email. I might not get the answer for a few hours, but in most cases, that's just fine. Don't interrupt unless it's something serious. That's a good advice.
It's one of the big things that a lot of companies have problems with, especially in an office environment, is it's hard to get work done and people interrupt you and so some places will have a policy of certain hours of the day everybody's at their desk and you can't go ask people things. It's like these specific hours are focus time, right? Nobody interrupts anybody during focus time.
Right. Yeah, I wish that was the case.
Yeah.
Oh man. And when you work in an office where everybody has phones on their desks and they actively use the paging system to transfer calls, Fred, call online too, and you're sitting there working on a problem, it's so annoying. And plus, if a lot of times those calls come to you and you hear that, you're like, oh God, are they about to say Chris? Are they about to say Chris? Are they about to say Chris? Okay, good, it wasn't me this time, phew. And it totally takes you out of what you're working on.
But you've totally lost your track, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, it's all gone.
It's like any decent PBX system will allow you to just forward it to the person's extension. You don't need to...
I know it. Okay.
But yeah,
so,
like when I worked in the research department at the college, it was great to be able to just lean over to the guy at the cubicle next to you and say, ask his opinion on something or whatever. But then there was also many times where by 3 p.m. in the afternoon, we were standing around talking about something geeky instead of working. And it's like, yes, it was fun, but it wasn't getting very much work done.
So, all right, Alan. So there you go. There's a good thread going already, and there's more suggestions people can add in there. We could always revisit that in the future. Now, we did have a thread also going on what news story headlines might happen during the week. Although, I'll tell you, Alan, I think my favorite one, and we could just go with this if you want. I think the one I got to go with, Scale Engine becomes self-aware and enslaves humanity. However, at 12 hours and 3 minutes, so that's when Scale Engine became aware. At 12 hours and 4 minutes, Scale Engine consumes all episodes of TechSNAP, reviews our security advice, and disconnects itself from the internet to be secure. And crisis is averted.
Scale Engine's like, I don't want to be hacked, so I'm just going to take myself.
And Scale Engine lives happily ever after on an island somewhere, sipping Scale Engine martinis.
There you go.
All right, Alan, let's get into our first technical question of the day. It comes from Anton, and he's got a question on setting up monitoring for a system that will do something large-scale across multiple clients and across Windows and Linux and Mac OS. So it's basically it. He goes on to mention that, essentially Mac OS and Linux and Unix all can pretty much expose the details he needs. But he's been horrified to find such a situation in Windows where, depending on the device driver, there might be no metrics at all that he can pull back. And so he's curious if either of us have ever worked with products that will work across all three operating systems and can even pull metrics from some funky Windows boxes. Do you have any thoughts on this?
SNMP is very popular. A lot of RAID controller. Like his specific question here was about detecting failed disks in a RAID controller. Mm-hmm. Many RAID controllers in their driver will have some type of either a trap or a full SNMP subagent. It basically allows it to expose information via SNMP so that you can pull it out with Nagios or whatever other OpenNMS or whatever else you're using. And, that can be important, especially if you're using something like a RAID 5 array.
Yeah.
Or even just mirroring. When a disk dies, you need to replace that quickly enough because in RAID 5, if a second disk dies, you've lost your array.
Yep. Yeah.
That's why Scale Engine uses RAID 6.
So I think, so I guess maybe step one is make sure you're using a Windows device that supports the reporting you need.
Right. Most Dells and HPs and so on will have this. If you're just using some random one, it's hard to say. But like the $8 SIL PCI Express card that I had, the driver had support for SNMP.
Also,
I've never actually used it, but like the Windows driver could report the data that I needed through Windows. Although
I believe
provide a driver like that for BSD.
If something is Windows hardware qualified for Windows Server 2008, then it also will do reporting via the WMI communications interface. So if you get something like there's several different free tools out there that will communicate with the WMI interface and convert it out to text or something like that. So you can even get something that would just read that if you wanted to use something like Nagios. But there's I'm blanking on the free tool that's out there that you can get that works really great with Windows for monitoring. It's a free tool that kind of sells ads and stuff like that, and it'll connect in with WMI and it can pull out stats that maybe aren't available via SNMP because that does kind of depend on what the driver exposes. But have you ever used Nagios to monitor a Windows box?
Yes, although most of the time it's very basic monitoring of the Windows box, like a number of processes, CPU time, and swap, and that was about it.
Yeah.
It's interesting how depending on what version of Windows and what like SNMP agent app you're using, how different the MIBs are.
Yes.
Like some of them will track CPU usage separately for each core and won't actually provide one that summarizes all the cores, which is kind of annoying. It's like you can't just get a stat of how much of the CPU is in use. You can either monitor the first core or monitor each one separately. You can't just get a summary.
I'm seeing if I can find the name of the tool because I believe it also supports monitoring Linux systems and Unix systems and Mac systems. I just can't remember what it was.
But basically, most server class hardware will provide something, like usually as part of the driver. Like in Linux and FreeBSD, most of them have some kind of driver that provides information and even lets you do things like configure the RAID array via the command line instead of having to use the BIOS tools because you don't want to reboot to configure a new RAID array if you don't have to, right?
Right.
Or the whole point of hot swapping is to be able to do it without rebooting, so you need the command line tools. And so all the RAID controllers I've worked with have such tools. Although, sometimes when they're not supported for that operating system, then you run into other issues.
It was Spiceworks. Are you familiar with Spiceworks, sir?
It was in the search results when I was Googling for monitoring a RAID controller via SNMP.
Yeah, so Spiceworks is if you just give it your Windows domain credentials, it will set up monitoring with your Windows servers, and it'll pull out all of their hardware inventory and stuff. And you can also give it SSH logins to a Unix box or a Mac, and it can do that. And it's free. Now, it is semi-ad supported. They've got they use the Mint approach. I see you buy a lot of storage. If you start buying your storage from CDW, you could save money. That kind of stuff's in there, but it's free, and it's actually not bad. Mm-hmm. If Windows is an important system to monitor. All right, Alan, should we go to the next question?
Sure.
All right. The next question comes from Hegemon8, who is in the chat room right now pleading with us to read his question. Well, guess what, sir? Good news, because your question's next. So he writes in with a whole batch of questions, so I might do a little paraphrasing, but he knew we needed a lot. By the way, Alan, he caught your PC BSD review you did in LAS, and he loved it, so he threw it in a virtual box on his machine, and now he's got 3 operating systems, but, he's hardcore. So, all right, he wants to know about, let's see, I'm skimming it here. He's got, all right. I wish to have 3 operating systems installed, but knowing me, I'll sooner or later mess it up, at least one of them trying to learn some new things. With my Samsung RIV something, I have Windows 7 with a secret recovery partition, right? Because Windows 7 makes that extra partition. So he wants to keep Windows on there. Now, I want to install PCBSD as a third OS. He's already got Kubuntu installed as well. And I'm wondering how to split the disk to save some space. I've used ext2FSD to learn Windows, to have Windows read and write extended 3 partitions. All right. Jesus, Hegemon, that's the biggest wall of text I have ever gotten onto this show. You just need to...
So basically, if you want to do something like that, you want to make one partition where you're going to keep like your home directory, basically all the files that you want to be common between all the operating systems you're trying to boot.
Yep.
And you want to pick a file system that's the most compatible. In your case, it might be just something as simple as ext2, because you can do that even in BSD and in Windows. And it doesn't have the same limitations you would run into with like FAT32, where there are no permissions, there's 4 gigabyte file limits, and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He asks also what order to install the operating systems in.
That really depends on a lot of things. Windows first, because it likes to overwrite stuff without asking.
Yeah. I bet PCBSD is the most gracious because it probably looks for Linux, right? Probably expects.
Yeah, although I don't think it really... BSD used to have a nice bootloader that would literally just list off your partitions.
Yeah.
And you could just, F1 for the first partition, F2 for the second partition, and so on, and even let you boot off a different disk, especially for older machines where your BIOS didn't let you pick which disk to boot off of. It was, the primary master was what you booted off of, and too bad. But with the GPT partition table, it doesn't provide a bootloader. It just boots the boot partition.
And he, one thing he could look into as well is there's a couple of tools out there like Parted Magic and the Parted Magic Live CD, and also the System Rescue CD will let you resize partitions, so you boot off that disk and you do the resizing there.
I don't think like multi-booting with that many different OSs is that useful anymore. Virtualization is fast enough that if you need one OS or the other, then you.
I pretty much agree. Yeah, unless you don't have like a VT capable processor.
Right, and you'll run into issues there.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about gaming and you're switching between Windows and Linux, that kind of makes sense. But I'd mostly just pick one OS and stick to it because I don't like rebooting all the time. I complain when I have to reboot my Windows machine once a month. So rebooting a couple times a day to switch OSs just wouldn't work for me.
He's going to get, it's a lot of partitions, especially if you're not going to probably want to do separate home partitions.
Well, yeah, because the other thing is if you're doing MBR, then you're limited to just 4 partitions.
Right.
Now, you can do an extended and 2 or 3 of those and eke out more, but, you're subdividing your space pretty badly. And it mostly comes down to, is it worth it to to do it.
When hard drives were cheaper and I wanted to natively boot, I would just do a different drive. Yeah. Now what I do, if it's not an operating system I'm going to run all the time, like I have a little 60 gigabyte SSD I got off of Newegg as like a review SSD for the Linux Action Show. That's just the distro of the review that I'm putting on there, and it's great. It's easy. I don't have to worry about messing with my partitions, and because it's only going to be on there for maybe like a month at the most, I don't really have to worry about running out of space. If you can do a separate drive, even if it's like a big 7200 RPM 500 gigabyte, I would go that route if you can. It's just a lot easier. It just makes life less of a hassle. Yep. So, all right, Alan, ready for the next question?
Yep.
Comes from Ivan, and he has a few sysadmin questions. He says, "Hi, Chris and Alan. I wish that someone introduced me with Linux systems earlier. Now I have so much catching up to do, including Jupiter Broadcasting's shows. So I have so many questions. Google usually helps, but people, let me tell you something. You can nag all day, but nothing beats Alan's basically thorough explanation and Chris's pragmatic view. Here are some questions that bug me the most. Number 1! Is there some nice open free web GUI for managing open VPN server, connection tracking, issue and revoking certificates? And number 2, what could I use for aggregating 2 ISP links besides pfSense? Maybe aggregating might be the wrong term. He says he has 2 ISP connections, a CentOS box, a router, and 2 LANs. And he's looking for some advice.
Yeah. So for the first one, I don't know of anything like that. My OpenVPN server is mostly just for me, so it has like 3 certificates. Does it provide, like, does it let you see which people are logged into the VPN right now?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Well, it provides a bunch of different VPN protocols too, not just OpenVPN.
Yeah.
It has like a L2PT and a PPTP, although you shouldn't use PPTP. So yeah, I don't know of a GUI that really does. I don't know that OpenVPN really exposes that information that in a usable fashion, really. I'm not that experienced with it, honestly. But yeah, normally your VPN, if you're going to have a lot of people using it, is going to be as part of some kind of router, and pfSense is the nicest GUI you're going to find for that.
Yeah, and I guess he's trying to maybe implement it on CentOS, kind of based on his...
Yeah. So I have no idea what to do for that. For the connection, for trying to use basically 2 WAN connections, 2 different internet connections, basically there's no way to do it properly without, 2 different ISPs. If you're going to have real routers and have an AS number and do it like real internet routing. And since you're not going to get that for your home connection, basically you're down to just having the NAT on either a multi-WAN router or any Linux or BSD machine with multiple NICs. And what you do is you say X% of all outgoing sessions use this NAT instead of that NAT. So basically you set up 2 separate NAT tables and you basically say half the connections go off this line and half the connections go off this line.
Right.
You can run into issues with that though. You have to do some kind of maybe you do it with a hash or something so that when you connect to a certain website, you always connect from the same IP. Because if you're loading pages on a website or something and your IP suddenly changes, it's likely to log you out or throw errors or something, right? Because your IP is going to be changing on different requests if you don't have some kind of
I'm sure like some places like Gmail might even flag it as like a hack attempt or something.
Yeah, if you're reading your email and you click the second email and all of a sudden your IP is different, then it could cause problems.
Yeah.
So and basically you're not going to get, if you're trying to do a download of a single file, you're not going to get both speeds put together. There's basically no way to do that unless you're using something that has multi-segmental downloading. But again, normally you're going to have it set up to, when it makes an outgoing connection to a certain address or even a range of addresses, it locks it to one of the 2 connections, and any more will keep going over that one. And then, connections to a different website might go off the other connection. And so basically with that setup, if you're downloading multiple files at once, you might get the speed of both connections. Although, if you have it 50-50, you only have a 50% chance that you're not going to have both files downloading over the slower connection of the two.
You know, I guess you could always do something like, I'm going to make Skype calls out this connection, and I'm going to do my torrent downloads out of this connection, and the two won't interrupt each other.
I did something like that. Basically, when I was in college, there was a cable connection share between everybody that lived in the house, and it often got slogged down pretty badly.
Yeah, sure.
So I had a DSL connection that I used for my internet and my gaming, but I had a virtual machine that ran my torrent client, and that was routed over the shared cable.
There you go. Very clever.
Or
very clever.
Later on, that was actually a full physical machine that was replaced the Linksys router with a full FreeBSD machine, and I routed a bunch of stuff. I would do my big downloads on that while gaming on my DSL connection.
I love it. All right. So next question?
Yep.
All right. That's a good one because, I remember especially that came up a lot in the early dial-up days. What if I got a dial-up account from two different ISPs and I combined them together? That was...
And then, when ISDN came out and you could actually just do that, have multiple channels, that was cool. And,
yes.
I always talked about getting that, but, I was 13. I couldn't afford it.
Yeah. And, ISDN still used today for radio.
Yep.
Right. That's how the radio hosts that do it remotely because it's so low latency. All right, Alan. The next question comes in. Just wants to clear something up. It's from Jay. He says, "Hi, Chris and Alan. I recently purchased a dedicated server from a hosting provider. They mentioned that to access it, like to get to the system boot or to get to the BIOS, I would need to get an IPMI, which they said was a KVM/IP. Could you guys explain what an IPMI/plus KVM-IP_? is? And more importantly, how can they be used securely over the internet? Love the show. Thanks, Jay." Sounds like you got a little jargon thrown at him from the hosting provider.
Yeah, a little bit. But yeah, so IPMI is basically, I think it's like Intelligent Platform Management Instrumentation or something. I forget what it actually stands for, but it's a standardized system and protocol for managing a server. It's like a out-of-band management system. And all the servers that I buy, like the ZFS server that we talked about and all the subsequent ones that I've bought, all have it. And basically, it's either a second MAC address on one of the NICs or a dedicated NIC. And it basically, you assign it an IP address in the BIOS, and then you can connect to it remotely and manage the machine as if you were sitting at it.
Mm-hmm.
It has a number of features from, setting. You can say reboot and boot off this specific device instead of the regular boot device on the next reboot. Mm-hmm. You can power the machine on and off. So if the machine is powered off but still plugged in and has power but is turned off, I can still connect to it because that out-of-band management card is really low power and just sits on the standby power. Yeah. And I can actually power the machine up. So that can be used for if you have a system where you need to scale up and down. You can actually turn the machines off when you're not using them.
So back in the early days, Alan, I had one that actually had a cable that came out of the back and plugged into the USB port. And then you could go in an Internet Explorer only web browser, you'd start a Java session, and then you could connect any of your local USB devices as a USB device to that management card. Of course, now you don't have to have that ridiculous USB cable anymore because it's all just on the PCI bus. But you could even do things like you could even be sitting halfway across the world and attach your USB CD-ROM, and it's crazy, but you can actually boot the remote system from a CD-ROM in your local machine. It would be horribly slow.
I do this on a regular basis.
Well, it's not so bad if you're doing something like FreeBSD, but if you're doing like I was a Server 2003 install, it's brutal.
Well, I also have 5-bit upload. Well, I guess you have decent upload too, but when a bunch of the ISPs I rent from, they'll provide the machine. They're like, well, we don't support FreeBSD, but it has IPMI, so go ahead. So they deliver a blank machine with the hardware specs I requested, and I connect to it over IPMI, mount the ISO image. Usually I use the net install ISO and have the remote machine download the files instead of reading, the whole 2 gigabyte DVD over my slow internet connection. Mm-hmm. But I've installed FreeBSD on like 15 servers in various places in Europe from my desk right here.
Now, most IPMI systems all include the ability to grab the console and control the mouse and keyboard, but his hosting provider was telling him he also needed to get an IP-KVM, so he's saying, what's an IP-KVM?
Usually that's built in as part of IPMI.
Yeah, but they were saying he needs both.
Console. Well,
you think maybe they're just
basically they charge for the extra port or something, and so they just want him to that. Or I'm not sure if he misunderstood.
Yeah, maybe.
Like, either they're saying he needs to pay a little bit extra to have that feature, or they're saying he has it and he just has to use it.
Yeah, that's probably what it is.
So normally it's on my super micros, it's just a URL. Like it's an IP address assigned to the machine that I connect to. Now there's a web interface that I use my browser and it uses Java and so on. Or actually for my super micros, they have a program called IPMI View that is like a desktop application.
For that Windows operating system?
Well, it's written in Java, so
okay.
they provide it for Linux and everything.
Cool.
And then you just basically, it has a list of all my machines. I double click on it and it brings up the login box. I can save my credentials, but I don't. And then I can see things like it monitors all the fan speeds and the CPU temperature, the status of the power supplies. And I've actually managed to get that now with the IPMI tool. IPMI tool is a open source app that interfaces with the IPMI device. And in the operating system, I can have it return the status of each of the two power supplies. Mm-hmm. So my Nagios now monitors the power supplies to tell me when one of the two fails.
That is so sweet.
Because they have a like an alarm that goes off, but the data center is not at my house, so I don't hear it. And it can do SNMP traps and so on. But this way, my Nagios goes off when it detects one of the two power supplies isn't doing what it's supposed to anymore.
You're using IPMI tool to output to some sort of...
so basically, I call the machine with Nagios and say, check your power supplies. It calls IPMI tool, gets the response, and either says, okay or not okay on the power supplies.
That's slick. So Nagios is actually able to do the actual... So it's not like it has to write to some sort of file that Nagios goes and reads every hour or something. That is really slick.
It depends how you do it. But yeah, you can have IPMI actually do a trap over SNMP. So the IPMI interface will call your SNMP agent, wherever it is, and say, hey, alert, power supply just died. Mm-hmm. And then that can then trap into Nagios if you want. Or you could have it go direct to Nagios or however you want to set it up.
Red alert, power supply's down.
Mine's set a little more passively because, it's not that big of an emergency since there are multiple power supplies. But
yeah, and they're in good, clean data centers. So
yes.
Yeah. All right, Alan. Well, the next email.
But yeah, mostly you probably don't need anything fancy to connect. A couple of them aren't as good. Like there's an Avocent one that...
Avocent, yeah.
Some of their older ones are like ActiveX based, and you have to have Internet Explorer to use it. And a lot of it's kind of kludgy.
The one I was talking
Most of them
about,
are Java based because that's cross-platform, right? If it's a website and a Java applet, it means you can use it on Linux without complaining. Yes, most. He also asked about securing it, or how can it be secure? Almost all IPMI servers support SSL. Like the Dell iDRAC, has it on by default.
Yep.
Although by default, all of them use the same standard certificate. Yeah. Like there's a self-signed certificate that comes on every one of them. Mm-hmm. And the problem is the way Firefox works, if you when you get the warning that, hey, this SSL certificate isn't
Get me out of here.
And you choose to go anyway, if you don't uncheck the permanently store this exception, then if you hit a second Dell box, it'll say, sorry, Firefox is cowardly refusing to connect because this is the same certificate we saw somewhere else.
Yeah. And
so it's probably some issue. But yeah, like all of my servers, we upload our own SSL certificate because we have a wildcard start at scaleengine.net. And so all of our IPMI servers use our SSL certificate.
Wildcard. All right, Alan. Next email comes not from Anonymous, no sir, but from Dandy Bandy in the IRC. He says, hi guys, I'm curious what your thoughts were in using Varnish to speed up Apache versus Nginx. I believe you get the same benefits from Nginx you'd listed on the show, as well as getting Varnish content caching, eliminating the need to even go to disk for static files. It can take some configuring to strip cookies off of the request for static files so Varnish properly caches them. Once that's done, though, I would imagine the performance would be a little bit better than Nginx. I don't have any hard numbers to back that up, but avoiding the disk for all those static files should give a performance increase. Once I put Varnish in front of all the static HTML site running on Apache, a single server allows the server to stand up to 20,000 to 30,000 HTTP requests per minute. Most of the reason it works so well is due to the 99% of the requests being served out of memory. What do you think of that there, Alan?
Varnish is very good. It's very fast and awesome. Just there are some things Nginx does that Varnish doesn't. So really, it's down to which tool is best for the job. So, and that really depends on your site and your application and so on. Varnish is faster, but it doesn't support things like fast CGI to actually handle applications. Right, with Nginx, you can say, "Oh, this request is for PHP file. Let's proxy it over to a fast CGI, and or whatever." Although in the example we're talking about we have to use Apache because we need .htaccess files or some Apache module or whatever. So we're just putting Nginx in front of it to speed it up. In that case, yes, Varnish in front of it will speed it up a bit more. Now, in my case, I wasn't doing any caching when I was talking about this. I was just using the fact that Nginx, the way it works with buffering the request and sending the response back, it would free up the Apache workers more quickly. Varnish would do the same thing. There are some downsides to Varnish. It doesn't support SSL, whereas Nginx does. And then he mentioned about the situation of like a denial of service attack or just a lot of requests. Varnish is a little bit less useful during a DOS attack because Varnish uses one thread per connection. So each incoming connection uses a thread, whereas Nginx uses a fixed number of threads. Like normally you would do like 1.5 or 2 times the number of processors you have. And then those threads handle many connections in a event-driven way. And so the structures are smaller and basically would use less resources for the same number of simultaneous connections. So especially if you're talking 20 or 30,000, Nginx may use less resources. Although if you're dealing that much with legitimate traffic, then you probably want Varnish anyway. So it's, again, it comes down to which tool is the best for the job. Both of them are great, and Scale Engine uses both of them extensively.
Well, there you go. I mean, that sort of sums it up right there, doesn't it?
Yeah. We have slightly different products. You know, Nginx is better if you're doing things like downloading episodes of TechSNAP where the files are very large and you're not going to fit them in RAM anyway. Then we use Nginx's cache there. But Varnish is better for small files like, the CSS and the JavaScript on JupyterBroadcasting.com. Those are all stored in RAM and Varnish. Varnish has some features like Grace where if all of a sudden 10 people request a new file, instead of asking the backend for 10 different copies of it, it asks for the one and has the other 9 people wait. Or if it's a file that just was in the cache but expired, say your file expires every 5 minutes or whatever, the first person to request it after it expires will wait while Varnish goes and gets a fresh copy. But the second guy, instead of waiting as well, he'll get the old copy if you allow it. Basically, you say, we allow a grace of, even though this is expired, let it be used for up to 3 minutes while the new version is being updated. And then once it's replaced, everybody gets the newer version. Because Varnish was designed for news websites, like a newspaper originally. And so for them, the news page doesn't update all that often and everybody can get the same version of it. Whereas if you're doing something like a forum, you can't do it that way, right? Each page is different depending on who's logged in. Like if all logged in users have to basically have almost no caching because you can cache the CSS and the JavaScript, but the generated page has to be unique every time.
That's one of the reasons why Twitter's had such a hard time with scalability, because every Twitter page is unique.
Yep.
And that can be a very complicated job to compute when you got thousands of users hitting it at once.
Exactly.
All right, should we do the next question?
Yep.
All right, this one comes in from a fella named Chris. Not this Chris, but a fella named Chris. He says, guys, with the possibility of British ISPs being forced to track every page you visit, is there a way around this, like using a VPN or a proxy? I'm just not sure I'm comfortable with my ISP tracking everything I do online. If the answer is a VPN is better, then is it better to use one hosted, like Hide VPN? Or is it better to go with my own virtual private server with OpenVPN running on it? Thanks for the great show, and keep up the work. This just seems like it's on people's mind lately, doesn't it?
Yeah. if you're using SSL, your ISP can tell what IP you connected to, but they can't really tell what pages you were looking at.
And the EFF has just released an HTTPS Everywhere extension update, so that might be one thing to grab.
So basically, every website that supports SSL, your browser will use it automatically. But yeah, if you're that worried about it, a VPN would basically mean that when they look at your traffic, they would see it's encrypted and that all your traffic back and forth is always to one certain IP address, which is the VPN endpoint. The advantage to using your own server is that you control it completely. You know, you have a little better safety as far as you more likely to be able to tell if somebody was tampering with it or something. The disadvantage of that is that obviously they could track how you paid for that and maybe more easily prove that this traffic was you.
And that you intentionally were avoiding it.
Well,
maybe. I guess you'd still be intentionally.
Not necessarily illegal to intentionally avoid it, but if it's just all the traffic that came out of your house and there's multiple people that live in your house, they can't prove who it was. But if it goes to a certain VPN server and it's your credit card that paid for it, then it's harder to refute that it was you.
I know you almost wonder if it wasn't me, it was my open Wi-Fi access point isn't the better defense route to go, right? Because it almost seems like that's like, they'll almost give you a one-time pass for that kind of stuff.
Right.
But yeah, it's an interesting, I'd love to hear.
I think that this whole ISP tracking thing is silly because a VPN defeats it. So what good is it?
I know, and it's not like we won't engineer a way around it, like the community at large. And
more importantly is the only reason the big ISPs are going for it is because it will kill small ISPs.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
You know what? You're totally
a small
right.
ISP can't buy all this equipment or the storage.
No, it's way too much
to store every user's. Like, are they talking about just tracking what IP addresses you connect to, or are they talking about like logging the traffic?
Even if it's just the URLs, you got to figure at some point in the future it's going to be the entire page, right?
To do URLs, you have to snoop in on the traffic.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, you just have IP addresses.
Right.
No,
it's got to be URLs, right? It's got to be because
all SSL, you don't get anything.
Well, there you go. So I would love to hear suggestions from the audience on good VPN providers that are trusted, because it seems like the key thing to if you're going to go with somebody else's VPN solution, you got to trust them.
You don't trust anybody's VPN,
right? I mean, right? But there's not everybody can do an open VPN server, though.
Right. It's a trade-off. But if you need it to be secure, you have to do it yourself.
Yeah, boy, jeez. Okay, well, there you go. That's a great batch of questions, right?
Yes.
So thank you, everybody, for emailing those to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. All right, Alan, with all of the questions done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup were stories that didn't quite make it to the top of the show, but we still wanted to talk about them a little bit. Maybe give you some links to follow up on your own after the show if you're jonesing for more. And they're almost exclusively powered by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Alan, sir, are you ready for the first Roundup story?
Yep.
This one made a big grin go across my face because we totally called it on this show. I think when the story originally broke, you remember, Alan, that one of the first real big infrastructure stories for this show was that there was these pumps that had been hacked, and the hackers made the pump spin down or something like that and caused damage.
Turn them on and off until they broke or something else.
And we kind of seen some reports that made that look like BS, and we were kind of calling it BS. Well, now the Department of Homeland Security is essentially admitting, well, yeah, that was all crap, and we actually knew it was crap to begin with, but we just wanted to scare people. Officials behind the false claims told the Senate investigators that such reports weren't meant to be finished intelligence, and that despite their reports' inaccuracies and sloppy wording, they considered it to be a success. And the reason why it was a success, it did exactly what it was supposed to do, the DHS official told Senate investigators. Scared people. It generated interest. And I have got audio clips for Unfiltered that I opted not to play of Napolitano, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, saying, look, our goal was to scare people into action. And then after this happened, they brought a special Senate panel down to this cyber warfare simulator and showed them what could happen in a cyber warfare. And she said, quote unquote, I think we scared them pretty good.
Yeah, well, there's a technical term for this. It's called FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And it's, we've been hearing way too much of it.
So here's a little
Yes,
interesting.
people believe in movies too much, and they think that things they see in movies can happen in real life, and a lot of times they can't.
The DHS Kung Lao stands for Department of Homeland Security. Here's another part of the report. Almost no part of the initial reports of the incident had been accurate. Not the Fusion Center report or DHS's own intelligence report or the intelligent briefing, wrote the Senate Investigation Committee in their report. The only fact that they got right was that the water pump in a small Illinois district had burned out. So everything else, the details about hackers and remote access, all of that was made up. They took advantage of a story to scare people. And now it's coming out as part of the Senate investigation. They admit to that. And, you know, I think it's extremely relevant that first of all, this came out during Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and second of all, that there is an executive order drafted for cyber legislation that would be components of CISPA that failed to pass. So interesting things to watch here, Alan. All right. Should we move on to the next roundup story?
Yep.
There we go. This one, I believe you tossed in there, Mr. Allen.
Yes.
On the,
Is
on the provable.
TLS provably secure?
Yeah, provable.
TLS is Transport Layer Security. It's SSL, basically, the newer version. And it talks about some of the problems with TLS and why, when you ask the question, is it provably secure, the answer is complicated. Basically, because of backwards compatibility and some stuff, there's a lot of stuff in there that, makes it not that secure. But it's still the best thing there is. And then, things like TLS 1.1 and 1.2 fix a lot of those bugs, but they're not really being widely adopted. Because everybody's more concerned about SSL just working rather than having to actually be 100% secure.
Well, sure. Alan, I find that the whole write-up is actually a pretty good write-up.
It's a good read, and it's not overly technical. So
it's got drawings.
Yeah, and it's, one of its headlines is like the briefest description of TLS ever. So, if you're interested at all in how cryptography works and what it does, it's definitely a good read.
Yeah, and if you're missing us on our regular Live Thursday, you could go read that. Now, this next one I tossed in the roundup because we don't always cover this type of stuff on TechSNAP, but I think it fits, and it just bothers the hell out of me. It's called precision marketing, and it's the new term that Verizon's giving its location-based information selling to third-party marketers about Verizon wireless users. It's kind of coming out right now and developing as we record this, so by the time TechSNAP 80 is actually out, then maybe more information will be available. But they call it a vertical venue. So you could be like at a sports stadium or a college campus or a ski area, and they'll sell your location information to potential advertisers. And it's not just going to stop with your location information as well. They're going to do what they call aggregated anonymous data about you that they will be selling. Now, you can actually opt out of this. I think you have 30 days to opt out, and the link in the show notes that we have will tell you how to do this. And AT&T also has a similar system, and you can opt out on it. But this is just so frustrating. It's so creepy. Like, don't they make enough money off their exorbitant data plans and their exorbitant texting prices and cell data plans, and they also have to make money off me? And if they are doing this, take money off my bill. Yeah.
And also, if they're going to invade your privacy, shouldn't you have to opt in rather than opt out?
How about that? How about that?
Sure, lots of people would opt in for $10 a month off their bill or something.
That's why they're not doing it, because if they make it opt in, they'd have to give you a penny.
Yeah.
So if that bothers you like it bothers me, we'll have a link to, you can take care of that in the show notes. It's just dirty play. And I guess it's probably something I should get more used to, because it's probably just going to keep happening. All right, Alan, the next story in here comes from you. It's from threatpost.com.
Yes. A cybercrime gang is recruiting bot masters in order to coordinate large-scale attacks against U.S. banks.
Ooh.
Basically, they've written their own Trojan spyware app, and they have a compiler for it, and basically they're recruiting botmasters, and we're like, well, here, we'll give you our finished product. You don't get the compiler because we're keeping that secret, but we'll give you the Trojan, and you can help us attack banks and get money or whatever. Specifically, it's basically Russian mafia and so on, and it's kind of a change. Normally, they had targeted European banks, specifically Eastern European and because it was easier to get away with and so on. But basically, almost everywhere in Europe, banks now require two-factor authentication to do wire transfers. And so they're basically shifting their target to U.S. banks now because they don't have the same level of security. They're basically their monitoring systems and they're are not as sophisticated, and they don't have two-factor authentication for wire transfers, mostly because they haven't been the subject of these attacks before. And so we may see a lot of news about that for a little while until the banks catch up with the security.
Next story.
Sure.
All right. This one is for any of you IRC lurkers out there. Great news. Thanks to the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Assistance. Boy, that's a great name. We have now, it just came out from Attorney General Eric Holder. He announced that there's new federal grants that will send hundreds of thousands of dollars to 13 agencies in an effort to step up enforcement of copyright and trademark laws. Oh, thank goodness. And how will they be doing some of this? That's right. They're actually going to jump into IRC and start looking for people who are trading files via IRC.
Which was a big thing in the 90s.
Well, and I just thought IRC was just off their radar. I thought, you know what, it must be just too complicated for them.
Well, originally that was one of the reasons for it, but also it's mostly just that it's not that popular for it anymore. Like, you know, it was a big thing for a long time, but IRC is, shrunken up quite a bit. There are a lot less people on IRC than there used to be, it seems. But the more troubling thing I found in the story is that some of the places that they're doing it, like local police departments.
Yeah.
How are they even going to know what IRC is?
Well, and why are they wasting their time on that? Shouldn't they be out giving...
Also, does a local police department have jurisdiction over copyright cases?
Apparently everybody's becoming copyright police.
I thought that was mostly the domain of the FBI, right? They're the one that it's the FBI warning you see at the beginning of a movie.
What really bothers me about it is what seems to be just the it's almost like at what point do we just say, all right, well, we're spending enough time and effort on intellectual property, right?
Well, one of the comments on that article is like, shouldn't the copyright holders be paying for this, not the taxpayers?
Oh, how about that? I do not understand why the federal government, why is it their job to protect Hollywood?
Well, it's their job to enforce the laws, but why does this one type of law get all this attention over other? You know, like the point of this article, there's like the police stations local police are too busy dealing with actual crimes to worry about chasing down copyright infringement. You know, and if they do get some funding, it should probably be more for anti-fraud rather than copyright infringement.
I mean, yeah, I would hate to see, like, the war on drugs has already been used as a horrible excuse to increase spending on cops and lockdown on citizens' rights. And I'm watching the same thing with copyright and trademark be used to accomplish the same exact thing. And so rights are being eaten from both ends of the rope for U.S. citizens. And it's just maddening. It's just absolutely maddening that these people apparently have a firm grip on the balls of the United States government. So, somebody that didn't have a firm grip on the reality of the financial situation was apparently the folks over at OnLive, a service that I had spent some time with, which was essentially cloud rendering for video games, and they would send you back in real time a video audio stream, which it actually worked. Sometimes there was some delay, but it actually worked. Now, here's the crazy part. They ended up shutting down, and all of their stuff and assets acquired just for 5 million smackers.
Well, right. They were doing this kind of hinky thing where they fired all the employees and sold their assets originally to a new version of themselves. That's the Bain Capital swap move. Yeah, where you fire everybody and you hire back the people you want with a different deal. Well, except for they weren't hiring back anybody, and then they sold off the leftovers for a couple of $1 million, and basically, so what they did is they had a lot of debt. They disowned it all by, bankrupting the company and selling the leftover useful parts to a new company, and then that new company sold everything off for $5 million. So the people that ran the company walked away with $5 million, and the employees got nothing.
And HTC, who made a significant investment, HTC is just down on the ropes these days.
Yeah, well, they're having a lot of problems themselves there, mostly to do with the fact that
they haven't made compelling hardware
Windows
for a year. 8.
Well, they kind of bet their money on Windows Phone 8, and that obviously is not working out so well for them.
Yeah, they lost $40 million in this OnLive deal. So did you ever see any of our OnLive coverage that we did here on the network?
Not
Very cool technology, Alan. So they had, I had like this super low-end Mac that I was able to play Borderlands on, that wasn't even released for the Mac at the time. And then later they released a hardware console. I think I actually have it here in studio. And this hardware console was the same thing. You could hook up a controller to it, and it would do all of the rendering with their library. But the problem was the game providers didn't really get along. But I got to imagine the technology they used to pull that off was probably pretty awesome. I would love to know more about it. And you think it could be used for all kinds of application delivery. So, all right, Alan, you ready for the next and I believe the last story in the roundup for this week?
Yep.
Now, you tossed this one in. It came from the /dot.org. You may have heard of this site before. The IETF starts work on next-generation HTTP standards.
Yeah, so they're starting HTTP 2.0. Right now we're still using 1.1, which has basically been around forever. And one of the things that it will include is HSTS support, which is basically a header that tells your browser with a certain time to live so that it eventually expires, but basically says, this site should always be done over SSL, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. So basically, it's kind of a prevention for a man-in-the-middle attack with something like SSL strip. So when you go to Gmail, and Gmail includes this HSTS header that says, Gmail will always have SSL. Then later, you access it over the public Wi-Fi at a coffee shop where someone has set up their machine to run your connection to SSL strip, where basically when you try to access the site, it pretends like there is no SSL and degrades you to a regular HTTP connection. And then, in this case, your browser would then know that, hey, Gmail said it would always have SSL. And basically allows you to prevent that type of man-in-the-middle attack. So it's interesting. There was some talk about using a completely different protocol rather than just an enhancement of regular HTTP. Right, because like HTTP 1.1 is basically compatible with 1.0, but is 2.0 going to be compatible or not? There was some talk about using something like Speedy, but that's Google's thing, and it's kind of specific. It's not really generalized.
But it is being already deployed, I think. And didn't Firefox even add support for it?
I think so.
Remember.
And it's useful in certain situations, but it's not useful for everything. So it wouldn't make a good replacement for HTTP.
Okay.
It may be a good alternate protocol, but it's not necessarily a good replacement for HTTP.
More like something like they can start at HTTP and then they can negotiate up to Speedy if it works for both ends or something. Yeah. Huh. Interesting to watch, though, huh?
Yep.
I'm already on HTTP 3.0 because that's just how I roll. But it's quaint that these guys are working on 2. That's nice. Yep. All right, Alan. Well, I think that's our whole show.
Basically.
Now, we are live typically on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern.
4 p.m. Eastern. What about the UTC? Come on, man.
Oh, 2000 UTC.
That helps, like Hegemon 8. He's from Ireland, so he follows the UTC time zone. So we're doing it just for him.
Yes, although he has to remember that sometimes, with daylight savings time, it might not actually be UTC.
That's very true. All right, so you can email the show, TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com, and you can also grab the show every Thursday evening, Friday mornings, in just about any format you'd like. And I encourage you to subscribe to the RSS feed. And I like to make the occasional plea, if you are one of our few iTunes users, please go into iTunes and rate and vote and comment and all those kinds of great things for TechSNAP, because that helps other people find our excellent show via the iTunes application. And since we don't have a ton of people using iTunes, we need every one of you who is. We need the TechSNAP Army's help. So thank you to everyone who does that, and thank you to everyone who uses our affiliate links at the bottom of jupiterbroadcasting.com. It helps us keep the show on the road. All right, Alan, thank you for the great show.
Yep.
All right, everyone, thank you for tuning to this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.